Peyton, get back here right now. You can barely string two words of English together. You're going to make a fool of yourself, and I can't afford that kind of humiliation. Spencer's roar echoed through the banquet hall. Married for 10 years, Spencer Sterling had always kept his wife, Peyton, hidden away, refusing to let her participate in any social events, molding her into an entirely useless housewife. Spencer was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation, and this annual gala was crucial for a billion-dollar European partnership. However, his translation team kept making mistakes, and the negotiation was on the verge of collapsing. Just as Mr. Reinhardt stood up to terminate the partnership, Peyton, whom Spencer had just reprimanded, slowly walked toward the VIP area and spoke in fluent German. This woman, imprisoned for 10 years, harbored an unknown secret. When Spencer walked out of the walk-in closet, he was adjusting his cuffs. The dark gray, custom-tailored Italian suit fit him perfectly, highlighting his broad shoulders and long legs, making him look dashing and triumphant. The limited edition IWC watch on his wrist reflected a cold gleam under the lights. He looked up, his gaze falling on me. There was no warmth in those eyes, only a trace of undisguised disgust. "Peyton, is that what you're wearing today?" He frowned, his tone sounding like he was evaluating a worthless commodity. I looked down at myself. A beige cashmere maxi dress, conservative in style with a high neck and long sleeves, the hem covering my ankles. The fabric was comfortable, soft, and well-fitted. It was the most decent piece of clothing in my closet. "What's wrong?" "I think it looks perfectly fine," I replied softly. Married for 10 years, my closet was stuffed with loungewear and conservative dresses Spencer had picked out for me. The colors were exclusively black or white, the styles always loose and baggy, perfectly concealing all my body lines. He always said, women who are too flashy easily attract trouble. He always said, as long as it's comfortable, there's no need to dress up. He always said, you are Mrs. Sterling, you don't need to rely on clothes to prove anything. For 10 years, I believed him. Fine. This is our company's most important annual gala. There will be many crucial foreign guests, along with numerous partners, politicians, and business elites. Spencer took a deep breath as if he was enduring something. You look like a retired schoolteacher going to a community center bake sale. Those words were like a needle, piercing with pinpoint accuracy. My heart tightened. I had heard this familiar belittlement countless times over the past decade. It wouldn't make you bleed, but it would repeatedly stab into the exact same spot until a callus formed, until you started to believe that you truly were entirely incompetent. "I'm sorry, these are the only clothes I have," I said. It was the truth. Over the past 10 years, I hadn't bought a single piece of clothing for myself. Every time we went out, Spencer would prepare my outfit in advance, telling me which dress to wear and which shoes to pair it with. If I raised an objection, he would use that disappointed tone to say how unreasonable I was being, and then I would compromise. I had been compromising all along. Spencer scoffed and didn't continue the topic. He pulled an envelope from the inner pocket of his suit jacket and tossed it casually onto the vanity. "This is for you. Once we get to the venue, hold on to this and sit in the corner waiting for me. Don't wander around. Don't chat with people. Just stay quiet." I picked up the envelope and pulled out the contents. It was an admission ticket for the annual gala, exquisitely crafted with the words, "Sterling Enterprises Annual Gala," printed in gold foil. At the bottom of the ticket, a line of small text clearly read, "Mrs. Spencer Sterling." Those 3 words were like a stamp, compressing my entire identity into this single title. "Why won't you let me go in with you?" "I am your wife." I felt a pang of grievance, my voice dropping involuntarily. Spencer turned around, the expression on his face instantly turning icy, carrying an unquestionable sense of command. "Peyton, behave." His voice dropped, as if scolding a disobedient child. "You know how high-profile my company's gala is. The attendees are all political figures, business tycoons, and international partners. Just go, sit quietly, don't voice any opinions, and definitely do not talk to anyone." He paused, his gaze sweeping up and down my body with an almost judgmental intent. especially the foreign guests. You can barely string 2 words of English together. You're going to make a fool of yourself, and I can't afford that kind of humiliation. Those words were like a thorn, stabbing fiercely into my heart. I can barely string 2 words of English together. I looked up at Spencer's back. My husband, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar multinational trading company, had successfully molded me over the past decade into a housewife who was good for nothing but cleaning and cooking. He was terrified of me attending any social events. He was terrified of me having contact with the outside world. He was even more terrified of people finding out who I used to be. He constantly negated me, belittled me, battered my self-esteem, and even stripped me of all opportunities for self-improvement. I wanted to take language classes. He said it was a waste of money. I wanted to go out and work. He said our family wasn't short on that little salary. I wanted to see friends. He said those people lacked class and weren't fit to be my friends. In 10 years, all my social connections had been severed by him. All my confidence had been ground away by him. I had even begun to forget who I once was. Do you understand? Spencer turned his head, a threat lacing his tone. Understood. I lowered my eyes and replied softly. Spencer smiled with satisfaction. He walked over and habitually patted my head, as if soothing an obedient pet dog. Good girl. If you behave tonight, I'll buy you that limited edition Le Creuset cookware set you like. He turned and left, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. The door closed, and the entire walk-in closet fell silent. I sat in front of the vanity, looking at myself in the mirror. 35 years old. My skin was fairly well maintained, without wrinkles or spots, but my eyes lacked their former spark. My face was still elegant, my features refined, but that once vibrant confidence and sharpness had been completely eroded by a decade of being walled in. I reached out and gently traced the handle of the vanity drawer. After hesitating for a long time, I finally pulled it open. Tucked away in the deepest part of the drawer, under some old magazines, was a dark red certificate. Top-tier International Simultaneous Interpreter Certification. In the photo on the certificate, the woman's eyes were bright, the corners of her mouth slightly upturned, carrying an arrogant pride that looked down upon the world. She wore a sharply tailored black blazer, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail, looking entirely like an unsheathed sword, radiating brilliance. That was 25-year-old Peyton. At 25, I worked as a simultaneous interpreter at the United Nations headquarters, the youngest resident interpreter of Asian descent at the time. I was fluent in 8 languages: Mandarin, English, German, French, Russian, Japanese, Italian, and Spanish, and was hailed by the industry as a genius star in the translation world. My name appeared on the invitation letters of international conferences, and my voice was transmitted through translation headsets into the ears of political dignitaries across the globe. At 26, I met Spencer. With his extreme gentleness and meticulous promises, he made me believe that the warmth of a family was more important than the glory of a career. He said, "Peyton, you work too hard. I want to take care of you." He said, "Peyton, you don't have to push yourself so much. I can provide for you." He said, "Peyton, I love your innocence. I will protect you for the rest of my life." At 27, I married him. I gave up everything. I declined my contract renewal with the UN, turned down all translation offers, deleted all my professional social media accounts, and completely exited the circle where I once stood at the very peak. I became the housewife of the Sterling family. Thinking back on it now, that wasn't protection, it was imprisonment. What he needed wasn't a wife, but a background prop that allowed him to comfortably display his success. An accessory that wouldn't steal his spotlight, wouldn't question his abilities, and wouldn't make him feel inferior in front of outsiders. A vase. Not even a vase is at least pretty to look at. What he wanted was a shadow. I took a deep breath, placed the certificate back into the deepest corner of the drawer, and covered it with the old magazines. Tonight, I didn't want to be that background prop anymore. The annual gala was held in the top-floor banquet hall of the most luxurious international hotel downtown. As the car drove into the hotel's underground garage, I looked out the window and saw rows of luxury cars parked neatly. Bentleys, Maybachs, Porsches, the license plates were more prestigious one after the other. Arthur, Spencer's driver, parked the car securely and jogged around to open the door. "Mr. Sterling, we're here." Spencer adjusted his tie and stepped out. He stood by the car door and reached out his hand to me, but the force of his grip was less about intimacy and more about control. He gripped my hand tightly, his knuckles practically digging into my wrist. "Remember, talk less, smile more," he warned in a low voice, his lips barely moving, as if issuing an order to a spy. The elevator went straight from the garage to the top floor. The moment the doors opened, lights and sounds rushed in like a tidal wave. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the triple-height vaulted ceiling, every single crystal refracting shattered light, illuminating the entire banquet hall like broad daylight. A deep red carpet ran down the center of the hall, flanked by enormous floral arrangements. The scent of lilies and roses mingled together, so intense it was almost dizzying. At least 200 or 300 people had already arrived. The men were dressed uniformly in dark suits, while the women wore evening gowns of all colors, their jewelry sparkling under the lights. The air was filled with the scent of perfume. Mixed with the smell of champagne and cigars, it was the smell of money and power. I subconsciously leaned closer to Spencer. His arm flexed slightly, pinning me to his side. Just as we walked into the hall, a middle-aged man in a dark blue suit hurried over. He was slightly plump, wore a professional smile, and held a glass of champagne. "Mr. Sterling, you've arrived." Spencer's face instantly switched to another expression, that confident, controlling smile unique to successful men. "Marcus, quite the setup you have today." "You bet. The whole company spent 2 months prepping for this." Marcus's gaze landed on me with a hint of scrutiny. "And this must be Mrs. Sterling? 10 years, and we finally get to see the real you." Spencer immediately laughed and pulled me slightly behind him, an almost subconscious movement. "A housewife like her is just here to join the fun. She's easily spooked, so don't scare her," he said with a laugh, his tone as if he were introducing an irrelevant piece of furniture. Marcus smiled politely. "You must be joking, Mr. Sterling." Mrs. Sterling clearly looks like a wonderful, supportive wife. His gaze lingered on me for less than 2 seconds before swiftly moving away. Just then, a woman's voice called out from behind. "Mr. Sterling, the foreign delegation is ready." The team from Frankfurt just arrived. I was just about to go receive them. I turned my head. A woman was emerging from the crowd. She was tall, wearing a boldly tailored wine-red evening gown. The plunging neckline and the slit in the skirt made her exceptionally striking in the crowd. Her makeup was flawless, her eyeliner impeccably drawn, and her lips were painted a shade matching her dress. She walked over with a smile, exuding the capable and seductive aura typical of an elite corporate woman. That was Spencer's secretary, Chloe. Her voice sounded much more like Spencer's female companion than I, his actual wife, did. Spencer immediately let go of my hand, turned to Chloe, and his smile became much more natural and enthusiastic. "You've done an excellent job. Has Mr. Reinhardt arrived?" "Yes, he's in the VIP area. With his advisory team, 6 people in total." Chloe's gaze swept over me. She gave a polite nod and didn't say another word. That single glance was like acknowledging the presence of a completely inconsequential person. "Peyton, just find a random place to sit and don't wander off." Spencer didn't even wait for my response before walking briskly with Chloe toward the VIP area deep inside the banquet hall. I stood there, watching the backs of the 2 of them walking side by side. Chloe walked on Spencer's right, her head slightly tilted to listen to him speak, nodding occasionally. Her posture was very natural, as if she had stood in that exact spot for a very, very long time. My heart felt completely tranquil. For the past 10 years, Chloe's existence had never been a secret. Spencer's explanation was always, "She is my right-hand assistant, it's strictly for work." The late-night messages on his phone, the last-minute additions of his female secretary to the travel manifest during business trips, those ambiguous photos at company parties, I had seen them all. But I never questioned him. Because I had been educated to be understanding, to be generous, to trust my husband. Because every time I showed any dissatisfaction, Spencer would use that disappointed tone and say, "Why are you so distrustful of me?" and then give me the cold shoulder for days. Because I was already used to it. I was used to playing the role of the oblivious wife. I was used to my position always coming second to Chloe's. I was used to being shoved into the corner at every important occasion, while he always had a younger, more glamorous woman standing next to him, capable of holding the fort for him. But I knew this annual gala was critical for Spencer's company. He was negotiating a billion-dollar European supply chain contract. If successful, his company would permanently cement its status among top-tier international enterprises. And the core figure of this negotiation was the CEO of the Hesse Group from Germany, Mr. Reinhardt. I had looked up Mr. Reinhardt's profile online. He was an incredibly picky German, hailing from an industrial family in Frankfurt, with extremely high standards for the professionalism of his partners. He only trusted business negotiations conducted in his mother tongue and possessed an almost paranoid demand for translation accuracy. Spencer's translation team, if those few people could even be called a team, had absolutely no chance of handling a negotiation of this caliber. I didn't listen to Spencer's order to go sit in a corner. I walked straight toward the buffet table in the lounge area. I needed to find something to do. More importantly, I needed to observe. The buffet table was set up on the east side of the banquet hall. The long white tablecloth was laden with exquisite foods. French foie gras paired with fig jam, Italian prosciutto sliced as thin as cicada wings, Japanese sushi neatly arranged on wooden trays, and an entire Norwegian salmon being sliced on the spot. Waiters in crisp white shirts and black vests navigated through the crowd, balancing silver trays. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and leaned against a pillar in the corner. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass. Through the gaps in the crowd, I could clearly see what was happening in the VIP area. It was cordoned off by deep red velvet ropes, the floor covered by an even thicker carpet than the main hall. Several round tables were arranged around a central negotiation area, equipped with simultaneous translation devices, headsets, and microphones. Spencer was standing in front of Mr. Reinhardt, sweating profusely and gesturing wildly. Mr. Reinhardt was a tall German man, his silver-gray hair combed immaculately, wearing gold-rimmed glasses. He wore a dark blue double-breasted suit, his posture ramrod straight, exuding a distinctly Germanic sense of rigor and distance. His expression was incredibly severe as he shook his head repeatedly. Spencer's translator, a young man in a gray suit and thick black-rimmed glasses, was sweating buckets, trying to translate Spencer's words into German. But his speaking pace was very slow, stumbling over his words, pausing every few sentences as if struggling to find the exact terminology. I scrutinized the translator. He looked young, maybe 26 or 27, likely fresh to the industry. He was clutching a piece of paper covered in notes, the page already crumpled from the sweat on his palms. He was clearly unfamiliar with the technical jargon in commercial contracts. He had completely mistranslated the term force majeure clause 3 times. The first time, he used Hoher Gewalt, which was technically correct, but his pronunciation was so off it sounded like Horgewalt, heard violence. The second time, he tried to explain the clause, but his grammar was a total mess, completely reversing the subject and object. The third time, he simply froze, standing there with his mouth open like a stranded fish. The advisory team next to Mr. Reinhardt began whispering among themselves. I heard a voice speaking French. This translator doesn't even know the basic terminology. Sterling Enterprises' professionalism is highly questionable. The speaker was a French man with a goatee, wearing a beautifully tailored gray suit with a small French flag lapel pin. That was Mr. Michel, Mr. Reinhardt's French advisor in charge of logistics and legal affairs. Another voice responded in Russian. The German delegation is already very impatient. I heard Reinhardt say, "Waste of time." It was a heavily bearded, burly Russian man speaking with a thick Moscow accent. He was likely the Russian representative, handling energy quotas for the Eastern European market. The corners of my mouth curled up slightly. Spencer never let me attend his company gatherings, not just because he was afraid I'd steal his thunder, but more importantly, he was afraid I'd discover that the company he was so proud of wasn't nearly as flawless as he boasted. For instance, he lacked genuinely top-tier international translators. For instance, his translation team couldn't even handle a proper multilingual negotiation. For instance, his international strategy was nothing more than a pretty facade. I continued to stand in the corner, silently listening to every word exchanged in the VIP area. Spencer's translator had completely lost his composure. He started frequently checking his phone, seemingly using a translation app to look up words on the fly. But for every word he looked up, he had to pause for 10 seconds, completely fracturing the rhythm of the negotiation. Mr. Reinhardt's expression was growing increasingly ugly. He glanced down at the watch on his wrist. It was a vintage A, Lang Sohn, its silver dial gleaming softly under the lights. Then he looked up and said a single sentence in German to the advisor next to him. "If we cannot get a clear proposal within the next 15 minutes, I will terminate this negotiation." His voice wasn't loud, but his tone carried an unquestionable decisiveness. Spencer obviously hadn't understood the sentence. He was still standing there, forcing a stiff smile, waiting for the translator to relay Mr. Reinhardt's words. But the translator was completely paralyzed. His lips were trembling, and he was crushing his notes into a tight ball. Chloe tried to intervene. She took a step forward and spoke to Mr. Reinhardt in fluent English. "Mr. Reinhardt, please give us some more time. Mr. Sterling highly values the partnership with your company, and we can." "Please use precise language," Mr. Reinhardt interrupted her directly in German. "We are discussing contract details, not exchanging pleasantries. English lacks the precision we require for this technical negotiation. If your company doesn't have a qualified German translator, there's no need to waste any more of our time." Chloe's face froze. Her English was perfectly adequate for casual business communication, but when it came to legal clauses and technical negotiation details, she was completely out of her depth. She retreated back to Spencer's side and whispered in English, "Mr. Sterling, they are getting impatient." Reinhardt said if there is no clear proposal in 15 minutes, he will terminate the negotiation. Fine beads of sweat broke out on Spencer's forehead. He kept shooting desperate looks at his translator, but the young man looked like he was about to burst into tears. People around began whispering, "Mr. Sterling is in real trouble this time. What kind of translator did he hire? I heard this Mr. Reinhardt is very eccentric. He only trusts negotiations in his native language. Translating a contract detail wrong by one word could cost tens of millions. Man, if this deal falls through, it's going to be a massive blow to the company's reputation." Hearing these comments, the glass of sparkling water in my hand tipped slightly. The ice cubes clinked against the glass, making a sharp, crisp sound. Spencer stepped to the side, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. He kept his voice extremely low, but because I was in the corner, I could faintly hear his end of the conversation. "David, you need to get over here and save us." His voice was practically begging. "Yes, German. A specialized contract. German. Right now, can you make it in 10 minutes? Whoever was on the other end said something, and Spencer's face turned even uglier. "What? You're out in Brooklyn? At least 40 minutes? No, that's too late. They only gave us 15. He hung up the phone and rubbed the bridge of his nose forcefully. Mr. Reinhardt had seemingly lost all his patience. He stood up, adjusted the lapels of his suit, and picked up his wine glass from the table. It was a glass of Riesling, gleaming with a pale golden hue under the lights. "Mr. Sterling, I see no reason to continue today's negotiation," he said in German. His voice wasn't loud, but every word carried clearly into the ears of everyone present. "Our company has very strict requirements regarding the professionalism of our partners. Since your company has such severe issues with something as basic as translation, I cannot trust you to meet our standards in other areas." He paused, his cold gaze sweeping over Spencer, Chloe, and the completely ashen-faced translator. "I'm sorry, but this partnership ends here." Spencer's face instantly went pale as a sheet. He understood that the partnership was being terminated. Even if he didn't catch every German word Mr. Reinhardt said, the absolute finality in his tone and the act of standing up were enough for him to realize what was happening. "Wait," Spencer yelled in panicked English, his voice laced with obvious terror. "Mr. Reinhardt, please give me 5 more minutes." "Just 5 minutes, Mr. Reinhardt just offered a polite smile. It was a shallow smile, only the corners of his mouth lifting slightly, his eyes entirely devoid of warmth. He turned around, preparing to leave with his advisory team. It was right then that I made my decision. I set my glass of sparkling water down. The glass made a soft clink against the tabletop. I reached down and smoothed out the folds of my skirt. The beige cashmere felt soft and warm beneath my fingertips, like a final layer of armor. I took a deep breath. Then I started walking toward the VIP area. Every step I took was steady and resolute. My heels sank into the thick carpet, making almost no sound, but my spine was perfectly straight, my chin tilted up slightly, and my shoulders squared back. It felt incredibly foreign, yet so deeply familiar. Foreign, because I hadn't walked like this in 10 years. Familiar, because this was how 25-year-old Peyton walked. This was how the woman who stood unruffled in the UN General Assembly Hall, facing representatives from 193 countries, walked. 02. Chloe was the first to notice my approach. She was standing next to Spencer, clutching a contract file in her hands, looking frantic. When she saw me walking over, her brows instantly furrowed, and she mouthed to me silently, "Go away, don't make a mess." Spencer saw me too. His eyes instantly filled with anger and warning, his whole face tensing up. "Peyton, get back here." His voice was kept very low, but every syllable seemed squeezed through his teeth, carrying the suppressed rage of an impending storm. "Can't you understand me? Go back. Go back right now." He practically roared it. His voice was loud, sounding exceptionally grating in the quiet banquet hall. The people around us turned their heads, their gazes uniformly landing on me. Everyone was looking at me. The housewife Spencer Sterling had hidden away for a decade. Mr. Reinhardt stopped walking. Wearing a look of curiosity and confusion, he watched this sudden domestic drama unfold. His glasses reflected the light of the crystal chandelier, making it impossible to read the look in his eyes. The man beside him, Mr. Michel, also stopped, crossing his arms and watching the scene with great interest. I ignored Spencer's fury and walked straight up to Mr. Reinhardt. I stopped about 2 steps away from him. Mr. Reinhardt was almost a head taller than me. He lowered his head slightly, observing me with an evaluating gaze. There was no malice in that look, but no warmth either, like a precision instrument assessing an unknown object. Mr. Michel tilted his head and whispered a sentence in French to Mr. Reinhardt. "Reinhardt, who is this lady?" His voice was very soft, but in the quiet atmosphere, every syllable was distinctly audible. Mr. Reinhardt answered in German, his volume equally low. "Mr. Sterling's wife. It appears so, but it seems her husband doesn't want her here." They thought I couldn't understand. They thought I was just a lost, unilingual housewife who had wandered into the wrong room. I smiled slightly. I took a deep breath and, using fluent German with a standard Hanoverian accent, I spoke. "Mr. Reinhardt, please allow me to extend my most sincere apologies." My voice was clear and melodious, my phrasing precise and elegant. Every consonant was sharp and powerful, every vowel full and rounded. It was standard German from the Hanover region, widely considered the purest accent in the German language. "I am Peyton, Spencer's wife. I completely understand your doubts about our team's professionalism. But please give me a few minutes to clarify a few things for you." The entire room fell silent. Complete, deathly silence. Even the faint clinking from the crystal chandelier above became distinctly audible. Mr. Reinhardt's expression shifted from confusion to sheer astonishment. His eyebrows shot up, his lips parted slightly, and a flash of light crossed his eyes behind the gold-rimmed glasses. "Frau Sterling." He repeated my name in German, his pronunciation as flawless as a native German's. "Your German is outstanding. Your pronunciation is perfect." Thank you for the compliment, sir. I gave a slight bow, maintaining immaculate etiquette. I spent some time studying at Goethe University Frankfurt. Your Hanoverian accent reminds me of my days there. The lines around Mr. Reinhardt's mouth softened. Goethe University Frankfurt? He repeated it, a trace of interest entering his tone. Yes, sir. That was 12 years ago, I said. Spencer had finally snapped back to reality. He rushed over and tried to pull me away. His hand clamped onto my arm, his fingers digging forcefully into my skin. Peyton, what are you doing? Who told you to speak? Spencer's voice trembled with rage, his face flushed red. Are you crazy? Go back. Go back right now. I gently shook off his hand. I didn't turn to look at him, but addressed Mr. Reinhardt with an even firmer voice. Mr. Reinhardt, my husband is simply too anxious. He values the partnership with your company so much that he's lost his composure at this critical moment. I turned my head and looked at Spencer. Spencer, please do not interrupt me, I said to him calmly in English. But my tone carried an undeniable authority, the kind of aura only someone who has commanded massive rooms and controlled the big picture possesses. Spencer was stunned. His hand froze midair, his mouth hung slightly open, his entire body frozen as if he'd been put under a spell. He had never seen me like this. Mr. Reinhardt made a gesture. He raised his palms slightly, gently waving his fingers in Spencer's direction, signaling him to stay quiet. It was a simple but entirely undeniable motion. Spencer, as if bewitched, shut his mouth and took a half step back. Mr. Reinhardt's gaze returned to me. Mrs. Sterling, since you could understand our conversation, you must know our reservations regarding this contract. His tone had reverted to professional negotiation mode, but it was slightly softer than when he had spoken to Spencer. Specifically, the clause regarding the transfer of technical patents. Our position is exclusive licensing of the patent, not shared licensing. I took over smoothly. I heard your team's previous statement. Your company's requirement is that during the partnership, Sterling Enterprises receives exclusive usage rights for the patented technology in the U.S. market, but the ownership of the patent remains entirely with the Hesse Group. Mr. Reinhardt nodded, the approval in his eyes deepening. Exactly. But our translator made a severe error when conveying this information. I turned back to look at Spencer. I spoke to him in English, my voice concise and clear. Spencer, he interpreted patent transfer as patent sharing. These two concepts are completely different legally. Patent sharing means the Hesse Group forfeits ownership, while patent transfer is merely an authorization of usage rights. Your translator used the wrong terminology, and Reinhardt thought you were trying to scam them out of their patent ownership. Spencer's face cycled between white and red. His Adam's apple bobbed, his lips moved, but he couldn't squeeze out a single word. Behind him, Chloe's face was ashen, her knuckles white from gripping the contract. I turned back to face Mr. Reinhardt, continuing in German. Sir, I understand the importance you place on intellectual property. It is undoubtedly the most sensitive core issue in any international partnership. I paused, organizing my thoughts. Regarding the clause on technical patent transfer, our side can make the following commitments. I began. Using fluent and incredibly precise German, I broke down Sterling Enterprises' stance point by point. I cited relevant articles from the German Commercial Code, contrasted the legal differences in IP protection between the two countries, and pointed out the three critical misunderstandings in the previous translation version. My logical flow was airtight, my language impeccable, every single technical term used with surgical accuracy. First, regarding the scope of patent usage, we suggest limiting it strictly to the U.S. market, excluding the Canadian and Mexican markets, which your company will retain. Second, regarding the licensing term, we propose changing the 5-year exclusive license to a tiered structure of 3 years exclusive plus 2 years non-exclusive. This ensures your company's interests while giving us sufficient room for market expansion. Third, regarding the licensing fee, we accept your proposed model of a base fee plus a percentage of sales, but the percentage should be adjusted from 6% to 5.5%, because the cost of developing the North American market is significantly higher than the European market. Every single proposal hit the mark, and every single number was backed by solid reasoning. Mr. Reinhardt's eyes grew brighter and brighter. He interjected with questions periodically, and every question zeroed in on the most critical risk vectors in the contract. And I responded to all of them swiftly and flawlessly, without needing to pause to think or consult documents. That professional knowledge and legal jargon felt practically hardwired into my brain, accessible at my very fingertips. Mrs. Sterling, the tiered licensing structure you proposed is very interesting, Mr. Reinhardt said in German, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. But I would like to know if after the 3-year exclusive period your company fails to meet the established market expansion targets, does my side have the right to terminate the contract early? Of course, I answered immediately. I suggest adding a performance evaluation clause to the contract. A comprehensive review will be conducted every 12 months. If targets are missed for 2 consecutive reviews, your company has the right to unilaterally terminate the partnership without bearing any liability for breach of contract. Mr. Reinhardt exchanged a look with his German legal advisor. The advisor gave a slight nod. That proposal is very fair, Mr. Reinhardt said. The atmosphere of the negotiation was gradually thawing. The partnership seemed to be turning a corner. But exactly at that moment, Mr. Michel spoke up. He stepped forward, taking his place next to Mr. Reinhardt, his arms crossed over his chest. His goatee was exquisitely trimmed, every single hair laying perfectly in place. "Just a moment, Mrs. Sterling," he began. He spoke in French. His pace was blistering, carrying a thick Parisian accent, every syllable bouncing off the tip of his tongue. That kind of speed was practically impossible for a non-native French speaker to follow. "Our German team's concerns have been alleviated. But on behalf of the French team, I still have reservations regarding the division of logistical risks." He stared right at me, a barely perceptible smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the smile of someone issuing a test. "This is one of the most critical core interests in our contract with your company. During the cold chain transport segment from Lyon to New York, if the cargo is damaged, who bears the liability? According to your company's previous proposal, our side is to bear all transit risks, which is entirely unacceptable to us." He had deliberately switched to French. He clearly wanted to put me in my place. He wanted to see if this suddenly appearing Mrs. Sterling could genuinely handle everything thrown her way. Spencer's face froze once again. He looked at me with sheer desperation. He knew Chloe's English was already useless here, and there wasn't a single person on his staff who could translate professional French. His lips trembled slightly, his eyes filled with pleading, not pleading with Mr. Michel, but pleading with me. He was begging me not to let him make a fool of himself. I saw fear in his eyes. The fear of failure, the fear of losing face, the fear of having his absolute incompetence exposed in front of everyone. I gave a slight smile. I turned elegantly toward Mr. Michel. "Mr. Michel, your accent reminds me of the cafes in the 6th arrondissement of Paris." I began to speak. I replied in equally fluent and elegant French, infused with authentic Parisian charm. My French wasn't as rushed as his, but every syllable was sharp and accurate, every liaison natural and smooth. The intonation rose and fell beautifully, carrying a convincing professional authority. "Regarding the cold chain transport risk issue you raised, I completely understand your side's concerns. The spoilage rate of perishable goods during long-haul transport is indeed an undeniable commercial risk." I paused, organizing my thoughts. But I would like to point out that Sterling Enterprises owns 17 cold chain transit hubs across North America, covering the US, Canada, Mexico, and major Central American markets. This is one of our greatest advantages. I took a step forward, my voice turning even firmer. I suggest that the risk division should be allocated by transport segment. For the maritime segment from Lyon to the U.S. ports, the risk will be borne by your company because that segment is handled by a shipping firm designated by you. But for the overland segment from the U.S. ports to the final destinations, the risk will be handled by our side, as it relies on our fleet and warehousing network. Mr. Michel's expression shifted from challenging to strictly professional. He uncrossed his arms and leaned slightly forward. "And during the port handover?" If the cargo is damaged during the offloading process, who is responsible? His tone no longer held any hint of a test. He was genuinely discussing the business problem. I suggest we designate an independent third-party inspection agency in the contract, I replied immediately. SGS or Bureau Veritas would both be acceptable. Before the cargo clears the ship's rail, liability lies with your company. After it clears the rail, liability shifts to ours. The entire handover process will be recorded and archived by the third party to serve as the basis for liability determination. Mr. Michel fell silent. He turned and spoke in low tones with the French legal advisor beside him. Then he turned back, looking at me, his eyes holding something new respect. Magnifique, Mr. Michel couldn't help but praise. His voice held genuine admiration. Mrs. Sterling, your command of French and your understanding of international logistics law are incredibly impressive. I have worked in international trade for 30 years, and I rarely encounter a negotiating partner like you who excels in both the language and the technical expertise. Spencer stood right behind me. I could feel his presence, but I didn't dare turn around to look at him. I knew his body had to be entirely rigid, like a statue. The colleagues and guests around him had long since stopped chatting. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me. What shocked them wasn't just that I could speak French, but that I switched flawlessly between German and French without missing a beat, displaying a level of technical expertise that rivaled native industry veterans. Mr. Reinhardt and Mr. Michel exchanged a glance. They were clearly delighted by my sudden intervention. Mrs. Sterling, your professional capabilities are truly remarkable, Mr. Reinhardt said again in German. Then, regarding the expansion into the Eastern European market, our Russian team representative has a few thoughts. He looked toward the Russian man who had remained silent in the corner. The Russian representative had been sitting on the very edge of the VIP area. He sported a thick beard, neatly trimmed but lacking Mr. Michel's manicured delicacy, exuding the ruggedness typical of Russian men. His suit was dark gray and tailored looser than those of the German or French delegates, making his shoulders look exceptionally broad. On the table in front of him sat a glass of vodka straight, no ice. He hadn't spoken at all, simply listening quietly to everyone's statements, occasionally taking sips from his glass. Now, Mr. Reinhardt had directed the floor to him. The Russian representative stood up. He moved unhurriedly, first adjusting the front of his jacket before surveying the people in the room. His gaze finally settled on me. Mrs. Sterling, he began. He spoke Russian. Pure Russian, carrying the specific vowel enunciation of the Moscow region, every rolled R sharp and powerful. He didn't speak quickly, but every word felt pushed out from deep within his chest, carrying a heavy weight unique to northern nations. I have a question. His voice was low and resonant. Regarding the energy quotas, the Hesse Group has a natural gas project in eastern Siberia, and we hope that within the framework of this partnership, the liquefied natural gas produced there can be sold into the North American market through Sterling Enterprises channels. He paused, raised his glass, and took a swig of vodka. But the issue is the quota. Demand for natural gas in the North American market fluctuates drastically. We cannot possibly supply based on a fixed, unyielding number. We need a flexible quota mechanism that guarantees both our capacity utilization and Sterling Enterprises' supply stability. He set down his glass, planted both hands on the table, and leaned forward slightly. This issue sits at the intersection of energy economics and international trade law, and it is highly complex. Your company's previous translator mistranslated even the basic term, liquefied natural gas. The corners of his mouth twitched up into a helpless smile. He translated it as liquefied coal gas. Coal gas is what you find in a mine, not LNG. One wrong word, and the fundamental nature of the product is completely entirely different. Spencer swayed slightly on his feet. He understood the difference between liquefied natural gas and coal gas. It was the difference between a civilian fuel and an industrial raw material, the difference between tens of millions in profit and hundreds of millions in losses. He looked at me in absolute despair. His eyes told me he knew this was a dead end. How could a team that botched basic terminology ever hope to navigate a highly specialized negotiation on energy quotas? I simply offered a polite bow. I took a deep breath. Mr. Petrovich, I responded in Russian. My Russian pronunciation was immaculate, my intonation rising and falling perfectly, fully capturing that unique, emotional cadence inherent to the Russian language. Every rolled R tumbled beautifully, every vowel was robust and powerful, and I executed the notoriously difficult Russian verb conjugations flawlessly. The energy quota issue you raised is indeed a highly specialized and complex topic. But I believe the core of this issue isn't the quota itself, but rather the pricing mechanism. I took a step forward, standing right at the head of the round table. The eyes of the entire room were fixed on me. If we adopt a fixed quota, your side is obligated to supply the agreed amount regardless of market price fluctuations. The risk for your side is that if market prices spike, you take a loss. If market prices plummet, we take a loss. It is a zero-sum game that benefits neither party. Mr. Petrovich nodded, a flash of surprise crossing his eyes. And your recommendation is? A dynamic quota, I said. Peg the quota to market prices. Specifically, we establish a baseline price. When the market price exceeds the baseline, the quota automatically adjusts upward, allowing your side to enjoy the dividends of the price hike. When the market price falls below the baseline, the quota automatically adjusts downward, protecting our baseline costs. I walked over to a whiteboard, picked up a marker, and began drawing a simple diagram. This way, the quota is no longer a static number, but a function that shifts with the market. Your capacity utilization and Sterling Enterprises cost control are both fully safeguarded. My Russian echoed throughout the banquet hall. My voice was clear, confident, and resolute, carrying a compelling professional strength. I pivoted seamlessly from energy quotas to international trade conventions, from Eastern Siberian gas reserves to the energy demand structures of the North American market, from historical accords to future trends. My repository of knowledge and my gift for languages were on full, unmitigated display in that very moment. Mr. Petrovich stayed silent for a long time. He picked up his vodka glass and took another drink. Then he set it down, the smile on his face turning genuine and warm. Mrs. Sterling, he said in Russian, I have worked at Gazprom for 22 years. I have participated in countless international negotiations and seen countless translators and advisors. He paused, looking me right in the eye. But I have never seen anyone like you. Not only can you communicate effortlessly in Russian, but your grasp of energy economics surpasses even some of the analysts working under me. He extended his hand, palm up, in a classic Russian gesture of admiration. If you are ever willing, our headquarters in Moscow will always welcome you. The room fell completely silent. It wasn't an ordinary quiet, it was the stunned, awestruck silence of people who had just been deeply shaken. There were at least 200 or 300 people in the banquet hall, but at that moment, nobody spoke, nobody moved, nobody even dared to breathe too loudly. Everyone was watching me. This housewife in a beige cashmere dress who had been despised by her husband for 10 years. I stood in the center of the VIP area, the dynamic energy quota diagram I had drawn on the whiteboard behind me, facing elite corporate delegates from 3 different countries. What I had just done, in everyone's eyes, was like watching a mute suddenly step up and belt out a flawless aria. German, French, Russian. 3 languages, 3 entirely different fields of expertise, and I switched between them with absolute freedom, like a conductor leading a symphony orchestra. Every language had its own rhythm and cadence, the rigorous precision of German, the elegant fluidity of French, the deep emotional weight of Russian, and I had mastered them all to perfection. Mr. Reinhardt sat in his chair, his hands folded on the table, the eyes behind his gold-rimmed glasses gleaming. Suddenly, he threw his head back and laughed aloud. The laughter was incredibly loud in the quiet hall, carrying that straightforward, booming cheerfulness unique to Germans. Mr. Sterling, he called out in German, his gaze shifting to Spencer, who was standing ashen-faced behind me. To think you were hiding such a brilliant strategic advisor. Were you intentionally trying to surprise us? His tone was teasing, but heavily laced with genuine admiration. Your wife, Mrs. Sterling, is the most outstanding negotiating partner I have encountered in a decade. Her linguistic talents, professional acumen, and strategic mindset are truly world-class. Spencer's lips moved soundlessly. His face was devoid of color, the sweat from his earlier panic still clinging to his forehead. He looked as if every ounce of strength had been drained from his body. He couldn't utter a single syllable. I turned around and looked at Spencer. There was no gratitude in his eyes, no pride, not even anger. There was only terror. Pure, unadulterated, impossible to hide terror. He wasn't terrified of my language skills or my professional acumen, but rather the true version of myself that I had kept buried for 10 years for his sake. His lips trembled slightly as if trying to formulate words, but all he managed to squeeze out were a few broken sounds. Peyton. His voice was so soft it was almost inaudible. I didn't answer him. I just looked at him, my gaze as cold and unyielding as an invisible blade, slicing right through the hypocritical shell he had spent a decade meticulously crafting. Mr. Sterling, I said clearly in English. I believe it's time we go over the final details of the contract. I didn't give him any chance to argue. I turned back around, facing Mr. Reinhardt, Mr. Michel, and Mr. Petrovich once again. Gentlemen, please have a seat. I repeated the invitation seamlessly in German, French, and Russian, ensuring every delegate heard the welcome in their mother tongue. Let us run through the remaining clauses. I promise you, it won't take more than 40 minutes. 03. The next 40 minutes were the most exhilarating 40 minutes of my entire decade. I toggled back and forth between German, French, Russian, English, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish, my mind working like a pianist's fingers flying across black and white keys. When the head of the Italian delegation raised questions about the insurance clauses for Mediterranean shipping routes, I used fluent Italian to explain Sterling Enterprises' long-term agreement with the Mediterranean Shipping Company, citing specific articles regarding maritime freight from the Italian Civil Code. When the Japanese advisor expressed concerns about the competitive landscape in the North American market, I used Japanese to analyze the trade complementarity among the US, Canada, and Mexico, proposing a trilateral cooperative framework. When the Spanish delegate showed interest in expanding into the Latin American market, I used Spanish to brief him on Sterling Enterprises' current footprint in Mexico and Brazil, inviting him to participate in our next phase of operations. In every language, I operated at a native level of fluency. In every specialized domain, I deployed the knowledge reserves of an absolute expert. Everyone in the room was blown away by this multilingual negotiation masterclass. The foreign guests who had previously harbored doubts about Sterling Enterprises looked at me with zero skepticism remaining, only pure admiration and awe. People in Mr. Reinhardt's advisory team started whispering in Italian. Who is this woman? How is she switching between 6 languages so effortlessly? Someone gasped softly in Japanese. Unbelievable. Her Japanese is better than mine. She can even mimic the Kyoto dialect. Another marveled in Spanish. This is a linguistic miracle. I worked at the UN for 15 years and haven't met more than a handful of people who could pull this off. I heard every word, every language, every syllable. But I offered no reaction, remaining laser-focused on the negotiation at hand. Finally, the last signature was penned onto the final page of the last document. Mr. Reinhardt set down his fountain pen, stood up, and extended his hand to me once again. This time, his grip was incredibly firm, his palm warm and powerful. Mrs. Sterling, thank you, he said in German, his voice sincere and solemn. Without you, this partnership would never have come to fruition. Your professional prowess and personal charisma have left a profound impression on us. He reached into his suit's inner pocket and produced a business card, handing it to me with both hands. It was a stark white card, bearing only the company name and his name in black ink, no titles, no superfluous information. This was the highest tier card imaginable, given only to partners held in the utmost respect. I am officially inviting you to join the Hesse Group's North American strategy team as an independent strategic advisor. He stared straight into my eyes, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. This wasn't a request, it was a solemn invitation. Your talents should not be buried. The world needs to hear your voice. I took the card and glanced down at it. Then I looked back up and smiled. Mr. Reinhardt, I accept your invitation. The banquet hall erupted in thunderous applause. It wasn't the polite, perfunctory clapping of corporate events. It was genuine, heartfelt applause laced with awe and deep respect. Hundreds of hands clapped in unison, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings, shaking the crystal chandelier until it trembled slightly. Spencer had succeeded. $1 billion partnership agreement had been signed. But there wasn't a single trace of joy on his face. He stood there like a statue abandoned in a corner, his complexion ashen, his eyes entirely hollow. Everyone swarmed over. But the target of their flattery was no longer Spencer Sterling. It was me. Mrs. Sterling, you are absolutely incredible. Where did you graduate from? You're a total genius. A middle-aged woman in a pink evening gown squeezed her way up to me, her eyes shining with adoration. Your Russian is so authentic, I couldn't believe my ears. Did you live in Moscow? A young man in gold-rimmed glasses handed me a business card, his fingers actually trembling slightly. Mrs. Sterling, I am the representative for the U.S. branch of the International Chamber of Commerce. We hold a multilingual economic forum every year. It would be our immense honor to have you as our keynote speaker. Mr. Michel walked over as well. He pulled a gold foil business card from his pocket and spoke passionately in French. Mrs. Sterling, should you reconsider, our headquarters in Paris would welcome you anytime as our chief multilingual advisor. Your French and your professional expertise are truly world-class. I took his card and replied politely in French. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Michel. I will seriously consider it. Mr. Petrovich walked over holding his glass of vodka and said in Russian, Mrs. Sterling, Moscow welcomes you anytime. We have an entire floor at headquarters we can clear out just for your office. I smiled and answered in Russian, Mr. Petrovich, the moment I learn how to sing Katyusha in Russian, I will absolutely take you up on that. He let out a booming laugh and downed the rest of his vodka in one gulp. Mr. Reinhardt's Japanese advisor also approached, bowing respectfully as he spoke in Japanese. Mrs. Sterling, your mastery of Japanese is awe-inspiring. If it is convenient, I would love to ask you a few questions regarding market integration in Asia. I offered a slight bow and replied in Japanese, anytime. Please just send me an email. They didn't even spare Spencer a single glance. Spencer stood on the periphery of the crowd like an isolated island. His secretary, Chloe, stood next to him, her face deathly pale, her head down, completely silent. Her wine-red dress was still dazzling under the lights, but it was as if all the vitality had been siphoned out of her. She looked entirely dull and dim. She didn't dare look at me. From the moment I spoke my first sentence of German in the VIP area, she hadn't looked at me once. I knew exactly why. Because she was the informant Spencer had planted right beside me. Over the past 10 years, she reported my schedule, my friends, what groceries I bought, and who I spoke to, back to Spencer every single week. Spencer thought I didn't know, but I knew everything. I simply chose to remain silent, because I needed time to prepare. The commotion finally subsided. The foreign guests gradually departed. Mr. Reinhardt shook my hand goodbye, Mr. Michel gave me a traditional French double kiss on the cheeks, and Mr. Petrovich gave me a massive Russian bear hug. The banquet hall was emptying out, and the waitstaff started clearing the wine glasses and plates. Spencer stormed over to me. He grabbed my arm violently, his grip so vicious it felt like he was trying to crush my bones. His fingers locked around my wrist like iron clamps, his nails biting into my skin, leaving deep red welts. Peyton, what the hell are you trying to pull? His voice was low, seething with anger and suppressed panic. His eyes were bloodshot, his pupils constricted to pinpricks, his entire face twisted almost beyond recognition. I looked at him calmly. I glanced down at the hand gripping me, then raised my eyes to meet his gaze. I simply helped my husband save his company, I said, my voice as even as if I were stating a scientific fact. Didn't I? Help me. Spencer's face twisted with rage, his mouth twitching, the veins on his forehead practically bursting. You did this on purpose. Why did you hide what you could do? Why didn't you tell me you were fluent in 8 languages? Didn't you already know? I fired back. My voice was quiet, but every word fell like evidence submitted in a courtroom. Before we were married, I was a top-tier talent in the international translation world. When you were chasing me, did you really not know? Spencer froze. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second, but then clamped down even harder. You just selectively chose to forget, and you demanded that I forget too. I stared at him, my eyes filled with crushing disappointment. Spencer, it's not that you didn't know what I was capable of. You were just terrified. You were terrified that I was better than you. You were terrified that I had my own light, terrified that if I engaged with the broader world, I'd realize how mediocre you truly are. Spencer's gaze started darting wildly. He released my arm, took a half step back, and his lips trembled slightly. I wasn't terrified. His voice grew stammering, his eyes shifting around, unable to meet mine. I was protecting you. That industry is too complicated, too chaotic. I just wanted you to have a stable life. Stable? I let out a cold laugh. That icy laugh echoed sharply across the empty banquet hall. Stable enough that all I did every day was circle the stove? Stable enough that I didn't even have the right to choose what I wore? Stable enough that you could parade your secretary, Chloe, out in public while I rotted at home like an invisible ghost? I pointed toward the entrance of the hall. When you walked in here with her today, how many people thought she was your wife? How many people even knew who I was? Chloe was hiding behind a pillar a short distance away. Hearing my words, her body jolted violently, and she buried her head even lower. Chloe is just my assistant. Spencer denied loudly, his voice echoing under the vaulted ceilings. It's strictly for work. Stop being paranoid. Whether she's an assistant or not doesn't matter anymore. I shook my head. What matters is that for the past 10 years, driven by your own inferiority and need for control, you systematically tried to destroy me. You stripped away all my self-worth to turn me into the useless piece of trash who can only cook that you always told me I was. I paused and took a deep breath. Today, I'm simply letting you know Peyton is back. A flash of sheer malice crossed Spencer's face. His eyes changed, shifting from a panicked husband to a cornered beast. He suddenly dropped his voice, lacing it with menace. Peyton, don't forget that everything you have right now was given to you by me. His voice was hoarse and guttural, like sandpaper scraping over rough wood. The house, the car, every meal you eat, every piece of clothing on your back, it all belongs to Spencer Sterling. If you dare leave me, or if you leak a word of what happened today, you'll walk away with absolutely nothing. His fingers curled into tight fists, his knuckles turning white. Everything from your past 10 years belongs to me. You are nothing. I looked at him. My eyes were as calm as if I were looking at a complete stranger. You're wrong, Spencer. I reached into my clutch, pulled out a document, and handed it to him. It was a lawyer's letter, wrapped around a fully signed divorce agreement. The paper glared white under the lights, every single word printed with razor-sharp clarity. On the final page, my name was already signed on the dotted line, the handwriting neat and unflinching. What did you think I was doing for the past 10 years? My volume wasn't high, but every syllable struck like a hammer hitting a nail. I may not have had a formal job, but I never stopped learning. Do you know why I absolutely insisted on coming to this gala? Spencer's pupils contracted violently. His breathing grew jagged, his chest heaving aggressively. It wasn't to give you face, I said. It was to deal your company a lethal blow. I watched the sheer shock and horror paint over Spencer's features, feeling a long-lost rush of absolute vindication. It felt like being locked in a pitch-black cell for 10 years and finally finding the key to the door. Did you really think that just because you hid me away, I was totally oblivious to everything? I said evenly. For the past decade, I may not have been in the corporate world, but I used my free time to handle remote translation jobs and private tutoring, amassing a massive network of resources and contacts. I took a step forward, my voice hardening. I knew all about the risks and loopholes in your partnership with the Hesse Group long before tonight. The reason you never let me attend your gatherings wasn't just because you were afraid of me outshining you. The deeper reason was you were using my image as an incompetent housewife to cover up the professional deficiencies of your own company. Spencer's face grew uglier by the second. His lips were quivering, and he was crushing the lawyer's letter in his fist. Your translation team doesn't even come close to international standards. Your much-touted international strategy is nothing more than a hollow shell. You were terrified that if I showed up, I'd expose all of it. I pointed at the divorce agreement. And the reason I flawlessly resolved this crisis tonight wasn't for you. I paused. It was for me. I needed a flawless debut to announce my return. And your annual gala was the absolute perfect stage. Spencer violently ripped the divorce agreement in half. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the empty hall, the pieces fluttering to the floor like snow. Don't even think about it, he roared, his voice ricocheting off the dome. Peyton, don't you forget. Your mother's medical bills, your brother's college tuition, I paid for all of it. You think you can just kick me to the curb now? Not a chance in hell. His eyes were bloodshot, the veins bulging on his forehead. He looked like an enraged bull. I stared at him coldly. My mother's medical bills. My brother's college tuition. I repeated his words, my tone dripping with mockery. Spencer, you always thought you were bankrolling me, keeping me endlessly grateful so you could control me. I took my phone out of my clutch, opened a banking app, and shoved the screen in his face. The blue light from the screen illuminated his face, highlighting his absolute devastation. This is the money I made over the past year through online translation contracts and a few international investments. My voice was steady and resolute. Spencer, I do not rely on you to survive. The number displayed on the screen was staggering. It was a 7-figure sum. And not just the low end, we were talking high 7 figures. It was significantly more than the net profit Spencer's company made in an entire year. Spencer stopped breathing entirely. His eyes were glued to the phone screen, his pupils shrunk to dots, his mouth hanging slightly open as if he had just been struck by lightning. This is impossible. His voice was scratchy and trembling as if forced out of his throat. You're a housewife. How could you? Did you honestly think all I did at home every day was cook and clean? I gave a derisive laugh. I translate more contracts in a month than your company signs in a year. I simply chose to keep a low profile so you could keep living in the delusional bubble of your successful man persona. I pulled the phone back and slipped it into my clutch. As for my mother's medical bills and my brother's tuition, I will pay you back down to the very last cent. I, Peyton Hayes, do not need to use my family's debts to sustain an already rotting marriage. Spencer was in total panic mode now. His body was shaking slightly, his facial expressions morphing from rage to terror, and from terror to absolute pleading. He realized the canary he thought he had entirely under his thumb had grown razor-sharp talons. Peyton, I'm sorry. His voice suddenly turned soft, carrying a begging tone I had never heard before. I admit it, I was too selfish. I was scared. I was terrified you'd leave me. He took a step forward, trying to grab my hand. Please forgive me. We can start over. If you want to work, I'll open a company just for you, dedicated to. It's too late, Spencer. I shook my head, stepping back to avoid his hand. Did you think I was just doing simple translation work for you tonight at the gala? A triumphant smile touched the corners of my mouth. Mr. Reinhardt has already formally invited me to join the Hesse Group's North American strategy team as an independent strategic advisor. I looked Spencer dead in the eyes and enunciated every single word. And I accepted. Spencer's face went completely ghostly. It wasn't standard paleness, it was a translucent, terrifying white, as if all the blood had instantly been drained from his body. What does that mean? His voice was shaking uncontrollably. You should know better than I do. My voice was as cold as ice. The Hesse Group is Sterling Enterprises' core partner. The moment I become their strategic advisor, I will have access to all of Sterling Enterprises' core commercial secrets, your supply chain data, your cost structures, your client lists, your technical parameters. I paused. I will essentially hold the power to decide your company's fate. You can't do that. Spencer screamed, his voice breaking. Peyton, that's betrayal. Betrayal. I looked at him, my eyes filled with nothing but disgust. You betrayed our love first. You betrayed my trust, and you betrayed my life. My voice wasn't loud, but every word felt pushed out from the very bottom of my lungs, carrying 10 years of agony and rage. And you're standing here talking to me about betrayal? Do you even have the right? I ignored Spencer's hysterics. I turned around, picked up my coat from the back of a chair, and walked straight toward the exit of the banquet hall. My heels clicked against the carpet, making a muffled, rhythmic sound. Spencer was screaming something behind me, but his voice grew more distant, more blurred. I never looked back. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of Spencer through the shrinking gap. He was standing at the end of the hallway, leaning against the wall, looking as if his entire skeleton had been ripped out of him. His lips were moving, but I couldn't hear a word he was saying. The elevator began its descent. The numbers ticked down from 38 to 37, then 36, 35. I leaned against the elevator wall and closed my eyes. The cold metal seeped through my clothes, keeping me grounded. My appearance tonight had been like a lightning strike, shredding the web of lies and vanity Spencer had spent a decade spinning. Tomorrow, everything would be different. The next morning, I officially initiated the divorce proceedings. I had contacted the lawyer 6 months prior. Her name was Ms. Bennett, a senior partner at a prominent downtown firm. In her early 40s, with a sharp bob and rimless glasses, she was entirely no-nonsense. We met in the conference room of her firm. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was the downtown skyline, the towering skyscrapers reflecting blinding sunlight. Ms. Bennett sat at the opposite end of the long table, wearing a dark gray power suit, a massive stack of files spread out before her. Ms. Hayes, based on the information you've provided, I recommend the following strategy. Ms. Bennett flipped open a file, her voice calm and professional. First, the division of assets. The estate you live in is premarital property. This is exceptionally clear. The deed to the house is solely in your name, with no equitable interest belonging to Mr. Sterling. This asset is entirely exempt from division. I nodded. Second, regarding Mr. Sterling's marital misconduct. The audio recordings, photographs, and other evidence you've provided are sufficient to prove his ongoing illicit relationship during the marriage. This places us in a highly advantageous position for asset division and seeking compensatory damages. Ms. Bennett pushed her glasses up. Third, regarding the evidence of internal financial irregularities at Mr. Sterling's company that you submitted. We will hold off on presenting this to the court for now, keeping it as a bargaining chip. If Mr. Sterling agrees to an uncontested divorce, we stop there. If he obstructs, we play this card. Understood, I said. Additionally, regarding your mother's medical bills and your brother's tuition, we recommend calculating the total with standard market interest applied and returning it to him in one lump sum. This cleanly severs any moral leverage Mr. Sterling might try to claim. Ms. Bennett looked up from the documents, meeting my eyes. Ms. Hayes, I want to remind you that once we initiate this process, there is no turning back. Are you absolutely certain? I looked at her without a trace of hesitation. I am certain. That very afternoon, Spencer received the court summons. His reaction was even more explosive than I had anticipated. First, he played the emotional card. At 3 p.m., he showed up outside the gates of my estate. It was drizzling that day, the fine rain hitting the windows with a soft, static hiss. Spencer didn't have an umbrella. He just stood outside the iron gates, letting the rain soak his hair and suit. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his dark gray suit was completely saturated, turning it several shades darker. Peyton, open the door. His voice was hoarse, carrying a manufactured exhaustion. We need to talk. I stood behind the second-floor window, watching his figure in the rain. His lips were turning purple from the cold, and he looked entirely pathetic. Peyton, I know I was wrong. His voice traveled up through the curtain of rain, muffled and distant. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I shouldn't have controlled you, shouldn't have put you down. Just give me one chance to make it up to you, please. I didn't open the door. I pulled the curtain shut. The next day, he switched tactics. Realizing the emotional manipulation had failed, he pivoted to threats. He called me and said, "Peyton, think very carefully. That financial evidence you submitted, you stole that from my company. I can call the cops and have you arrested for corporate espionage." His voice was icy and belligerent, reverting to the CEO who controlled everything. "And all those online translations and investments? Did you pay taxes on those? Do you want me to tip off the IRS and have them audit you?" Listening to his rant, the corners of my mouth curled up. "Go right ahead, Spencer," I said. "My work records and income streams for the past year are 100% fully compliant. Every single payment is backed by a contract, every cent of tax has been paid on time, and frankly, my books are vastly more transparent than your company's internal ledgers." Dead silence on the other end. As for stealing, I paused. "Are you referring to the financial data I pulled from your company's servers? That data was being processed by you on our home computer, completely unencrypted and without a password. Me looking at my husband's work files on our shared home desktop, is that what you're calling theft?" Spencer remained silent for even longer. "Also, that little threat you just made? I recorded it," I added. "Do you want me to submit this recording as evidence to the court? Let the judge hear exactly how a husband threatens his wife." I heard a heavy, ragged breath over the line. Then the phone clicked dead. The Sterling family couldn't sit still either. 04. On the afternoon of the third day, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, dragged Spencer's sister, Audrey, to my estate, storming the gates. They didn't call ahead, they just relentlessly mashed the doorbell. Through the security feed, I saw them standing furiously outside the iron gate. Eleanor was wearing a deep red tailored suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, the wrinkles on her face deepened by pure outrage. Audrey stood behind her, wearing a pink Chanel jacket and clutching a Hermes Birkin bag. I buzzed them in and opened the front door. The second Eleanor crossed the threshold, she started screaming, her voice loud enough to wake the entire block. "Peyton, have you lost your damn mind?" She stood in the center of the living room, pointing her finger right at my nose, the flesh on her face trembling. "Has the Sterling family ever mistreated you? 10 years. 10 years of living in luxury, completely provided for. And now that you think your wings are fully grown, you want to fly the coop." Her voice was shrill and grating, carrying a horrific sense of entitlement. "Do you have any idea what this little stunt of yours is doing to Spencer at work? The board members are laughing at him. Are you determined to destroy the Sterling family before you're satisfied?" Audrey stood behind Eleanor, her arms crossed, chiming in with sarcastic venom. "Don't think you're suddenly some hotshot just because you learned a few foreign words, Peyton." Her tone was flippant and cruel, a sneer hanging on her lips. "What exactly can a housewife like you do anyway? Do you honestly think you can just march in and be some kind of strategic advisor? Stop turning our family upside down. Go back, apologize to my brother right now, and maybe this can still be salvaged." I sat on the living room sofa, watching them with absolute calm. The curtains were half open, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, casting a bright ribbon of light across the rug. I was wearing a crisp white blouse and black slacks, my hair tied back in a sleek ponytail, looking completely sharp and immaculate. "Eleanor, Audrey, let's get one thing straight." My voice wasn't loud, but every word struck like a gavel. This estate was bought with my own money before the marriage. It has absolutely nothing to do with Spencer. Both Eleanor and Audrey's faces froze instantly. Eleanor's jaw dropped, her expression twisting from fury to sheer disbelief. What did you just say?" Her voice lost all its certainty. "Before the marriage," I repeated, "I bought this house using my translation fees and investment returns. Spencer always assumed it was a company asset, but he forgot one crucial detail: only my name is on the deed to the house." I stood up, walked to the console table in the entryway, pulled a manila envelope from the drawer, and took out the deed. I held it out right in front of Eleanor's face. The document glared starkly in the sunlight. My name was printed on it with absolute clarity, without a single trace of Spencer Sterling. Spencer had always demanded that I keep the deed locked in the safe. He thought I was a helpless idiot who only knew how to cook, assuming I'd never touch the paperwork. I slid the deed back into the envelope. But he didn't know that I had backed up and notarized every single document ages ago. Audrey's face turned completely green. The hand clutching her Birkin bag was shaking so hard her manicured nails were practically tearing into the leather. "You are so incredibly manipulative, Peyton," she shrieked. "You've been scheming against my brother this entire time. You planned this from the very beginning." "I didn't scheme against anyone." I turned around, walked right up to them, and stared them down. "I simply protected myself. I had already built substantial wealth and a stellar career before we married, and I gave it all up for Spencer. Now I am merely taking back what is rightfully mine." I looked at Audrey, my voice hardening to steel. "As for what I can do, you're going to find out very soon." Right on cue, my phone rang. The ringtone was piercingly loud in the dead-quiet living room. I glanced down at the screen. The caller ID showed an international number, country code +49, Germany. I answered the call right in front of Eleanor and Audrey. "Hello." I answered in German. A deep, solemn male voice came through the line, carrying a standard Hanoverian accent. It was the voice of the president of the Hesse Group's North American division. "Mrs. Sterling, this is Fritz Wagner, president of Hesse North America. Mr. Reinhardt highly recommended you. I would like to formally extend an invitation for you to take the position of strategic advisor for our North American division. When can you come into the office for an onboarding meeting?" "Next week works perfectly," I replied in German. "Excellent. Additionally, regarding the partnership contract with Sterling Enterprises, I need you to participate in a comprehensive review of all the clauses. Mr. Reinhardt has some new thoughts on the previous draft, and he hopes you can serve as our representative in the next round of negotiations." "Not a problem," I said. "I will handle it the moment I officially join." I hung up the phone and looked up. Eleanor and Audrey stood before me, their expressions far beyond simple shock. Even though they couldn't understand German, they recognized the words Sterling Enterprises and review all the clauses. Eleanor's lips were trembling, her fingers shaking as she pointed at me, but she couldn't formulate a single word. Audrey grabbed her arm and muttered, "Mom, let's just go." They scrambled out of the house with their tails between their legs. I stood in the doorway, watching their figures disappear down the end of the street. Eleanor's crimson suit was glaring in the sunlight, Audrey's pink Chanel jacket flapping slightly in the wind. They were walking incredibly fast, as if fleeing a disaster zone. My return caused massive shockwaves throughout the international business community. The return of a legend, Peyton Hayes joins Hesse Group as North American Strategic Advisor. The headlines splashed across the front pages of major financial outlets. The Financial Times dedicated a full-page spread to the story, titled, "The Vanishing Genius, Peyton Hayes' 10-year silence and triumphant return." The Wall Street Journal's headline was even blunter: "Her husband hid her for a decade. Now she's back." The domestic media coverage was absolutely unrelenting. From housewife to multinational executive, the ultimate rebound. The multilingual genius strikes back, ex-husband's company stock plummets. Spencer Sterling's ex-wife is now his biggest competitor. Every single article was a public execution for Spencer. Sterling Enterprises stock began to tank. On the first day of trading, the stock dropped by 3%. The second day, it fell another 4%. On the third day, when the Hesse Group officially announced my appointment as North American Strategic Advisor, Sterling's stock plummeted by 11% in 30 minutes. The board of directors completely lost their minds. They relentlessly interrogated Spencer. "Why were you entirely oblivious to your own wife's capabilities? Why is she now the strategic advisor for our biggest partner? Why was her first act upon taking office to completely review and tear apart our partnership clauses?" Spencer couldn't answer a single one of these questions. He could only sit in the boardroom, facing the wrath of a dozen directors, sweating profusely, completely and utterly speechless. And my first move upon taking office was exactly what I had promised, a ruthless review of Sterling Enterprises' contract clauses. I wasn't doing it to exact petty revenge on Spencer. I was doing it to secure the absolute best interests of the Hesse Group. But under a truly professional lens, the price Sterling Enterprises was going to have to pay was monumentally higher than before. During an internal video conference with the Hesse Group, functioning in my capacity as strategic advisor, I implemented draconian requirements for Sterling's supply chain management. Sterling Enterprises faces a massive single supplier risk regarding their raw material sourcing in Central America. I stated clearly to the camera, my voice cold and professional. Currently, 70% of their raw materials come from a single supplier in Brazil, which is a catastrophic vulnerability for supply chain security. I recommend we mandate a supply chain diversification clause, requiring Sterling Enterprises to reduce their reliance on this single supplier to under 40% within 6 months. As the representative for the partnering firm, Spencer was also on the video call. His video feed was a tiny box in the bottom right corner of the screen. He was wearing a dark blue suit, sitting in a Sterling Enterprises conference room with a blank white wall behind him. He stared at the screen, at the powerful, utterly in-control version of me, his eyes swirling with heartbreaking complexity. There was shock, regret, terror, and something I had never once seen in his eyes before, pure, unadulterated awe. After the conference concluded, Spencer contacted me through a private channel. He used a phone number I didn't recognize. Peyton. His voice was exhausted and ragged, like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Do you really have to push it this far? I am simply doing my job, I replied coldly. You never used to be like this. You used to be so gentle, so compliant. You kept the house running perfectly, you never. Spencer, I cut him off. You never loved me. You loved a domesticated phantom. The line went dead silent. That wasn't gentleness, that was suppression. That was a soulless shell you personally manufactured. Are you really going to divorce me? We've been married for 10 years. 10 years, I interrupted again. For 10 years, you used my ignorance and compliance to fuel your vanity as a successful man to the outside world. And now, you're paying the price for your own arrogance. I paused. I found out about Chloe's secret. The breathing on the other end of the line hitched violently. Chloe was never your right-hand assistant. She was your informant. You were terrified of me engaging with the outside world, so Chloe reported my schedule, my friends, even what groceries I bought, directly to you every single day. Spencer was dead silent. This was his deepest, darkest secret. He was afraid I would discover his affair with Chloe, but he was far more terrified of me finding out that he had been systematically policing and surveying my entire existence. I admitted. Spencer's voice broke, hoarse and trembling. I was terrified. I was afraid that if you saw the broader world, you'd realize that I'm actually incredibly mediocre. I was terrified that with your genius mind, you'd see right through my hypocrisy. I already have, I said flatly. Spencer, your most fatal mistake wasn't the cheating. It was trying to lock a soaring eagle in a cage and breaking her wings. I took a deep breath. Well, I'm out of the cage now. And you can't stop me. I gave him 3 days to sign the divorce papers. If you don't sign, I will hand over the evidence of you illegally transferring corporate assets to your board of directors, I told him. That evidence is more than enough to put you in a defendant's chair in federal court. 3 days later, we met at Ms. Bennett's law firm. Spencer was wearing that same dark gray, custom-tailored Italian suit, but he looked 10 years older than he had 3 days ago. His hair was a mess, unstyled. His eyes were sunken with heavy, dark bags. His lips were chapped and peeling. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and his shirt collar was hopelessly wrinkled, as if he'd been wearing it for 3 days straight. He sat at the other end of the long table, the divorce agreement spread open before him. His lawyer sat next to him, an older, white-haired man wearing reading glasses, meticulously reviewing the document page by page. Ms. Bennett sat beside me, wearing her dark gray power suit, her expression entirely unreadable. The conference room was completely quiet, the only sound the rustling of turning pages. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting parallel bands of light across the table. "Mr. Sterling, if you have no further objections, please sign on the final page," Ms. Bennet said. Spencer didn't move. He kept his head down, staring at the agreement on the table, his lips trembling slightly. "Peyton," he suddenly spoke, his voice so shot it was barely a whisper. "Do you hate me?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "Hating someone is too exhausting. I simply don't love you anymore." Spencer's shoulders completely collapsed. He picked up the pen and signed his name on the last page. The nib scratched against the paper, a faint, scraping sound. His hand was shaking, the signature was crooked and entirely lacked his usual confident flourish. Ms. Bennet took the agreement, reviewed it once, and nodded. "The paperwork is in order. We will submit this to the court, and the divorce decree will be finalized in approximately 30 days. I stood up. Spencer remained in his chair, head down, staring blankly at the page he had just signed. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and walked toward the door. As I reached the threshold, I paused. "Spencer," I said. He didn't look up. "I won't intentionally target your company, but I will do my job, and I will do it my way. If Sterling Enterprises takes a hit in the process, that is simply the result of market competition, not my revenge." I paused. "Take care of yourself." I pushed open the door and walked out. Behind me, I heard a dull, heavy thud, like a fist smashing into the tabletop. I never looked back. On the day the divorce was finalized, I stood on the steps of the county courthouse. The early summer sun beat down on me, warm and accompanied by a gentle breeze. The leaves of the sycamore trees lining the street rustled softly. I watched Spencer's figure disappear at the end of the block. He was walking fast, his shoulders slumped, his suit jacket draped over his arm. His shadow stretched long and thin in the sunlight, growing further and smaller until it vanished completely into the crowd. I didn't feel a single ounce of nostalgia. He used to be a triumphant, idolized CEO. Now, he was just an ordinary man utterly devoured by his own insecurity and greed. I didn't choose revenge. I simply chose justice. Returning to the corporate world felt like recovering my soul. The Hesse Group's offices were located in a towering skyscraper in the financial district. From my office window, I had a sweeping view of the Hudson River. The water sparkled like gold in the sunlight, freighters and yachts cruising slowly along the surface, the Manhattan skyline towering in the distance. On my desk sat a computer, 2 phones, and a simultaneous translation terminal. The equipment had been specially shipped from the German headquarters. It was the newest digital translation rig, its silver-gray casing gleaming coldly under the lights. The first time I saw it, my fingers subconsciously traced over the dials and buttons. The tactile sensation was overwhelmingly familiar. 10 years ago, I faced equipment exactly like this every single day. My linguistic genius and strategic vision were unleashed to their absolute maximum at the Hesse Group. My work spanned dozens of countries and regions. I appeared on the podiums of international summits, at the roundtables of top-tier negotiations, and at the signing ceremonies of multinational conglomerates. My closet was no longer filled with beige cashmere maxi dresses, but sharply tailored power suits, black, navy blue, charcoal gray, every single one radiating power. I picked out every outfit myself, free from anyone else's approval. The sound of my heels clicking against marble floors was sharp, rhythmic, and commanding. I no longer needed to soften my footsteps to shrink my presence. 1 year later, I was promoted to Executive Vice President of Global Strategy for the Hesse Group. It was the first time in the company's 120-year history that an executive of Asian descent, let alone a woman, held the position. The promotion was announced on a Monday morning. Mr. Fritz Wagner called me personally. "Mrs. Hayes, the board of directors unanimously approved your promotion," he said in German, his voice ringing with genuine joy. "You are one of the youngest executives in the history of our company. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied in German. Additionally, at the Global Strategy Summit in Berlin next month, you will be delivering the keynote address representing the North American division. The topic is the strategic value of multilingual capabilities in international trade. Mr. Wagner paused. The board believes there is absolutely no one better suited to deliver this address than you. I would be honored, I said. Berlin. The Global Strategy Summit. The conference was held at the Hotel Adlon Kempinski in downtown Berlin, a historic luxury hotel situated right next to the Brandenburg Gate. The banquet hall had been transformed into a massive temporary conference center, with an enormous LED screen covering the entire back wall and simultaneous translation terminals set up precisely at every seat. Executive delegates from 47 countries and regions were gathered in the room. I was the final keynote speaker. When I stepped up to the podium, every single person in the audience knew who I was, or at the very least, they knew my story. The legendary translation prodigy, Peyton Hayes, returning to the throne after a 10-year exile. The story had become absolute mythology in the international corporate world. I stood at the podium, facing over 300 unfamiliar faces. The stage lights were blinding, making it almost impossible to see the audience clearly. But I could feel their eyes on me, curious, reverent, scrutinizing, moved. I took a deep breath. Then I spoke. Guten Morgen, I said in German. Bonjour. I switched to French. Buenos dias. Spanish. Buongiorno. Italian. Ohayou gozaimasu. Japanese. Dobro jutro. Russian. And I hao. Mandarin. Good morning. 8 languages. 8 greetings. A low murmur of awe rippled through the crowd. Then I started my speech in English. The topic I would like to share with you all today is the strategic value of multilingual capabilities in international trade. My voice passed through the translation feeds, simultaneously broadcasted in 8 languages directly into the earpieces of everyone in the room. But before I begin, I would like to tell you a story. I paused. Once, there was a woman. At 25 years old, she stood in the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations, providing simultaneous translation for delegates from 193 countries. She was fluent in 8 languages, hailed as a genius star in the translation world. The room was dead quiet. At 26, she met a man. That man told her, "You work too hard. Let me take care of you." And she believed him. My voice dropped slightly. At 27, she gave up everything, her career, her reputation, her dreams to marry this man. Then, she spent the next 10 years learning exactly one thing: how to be an obedient wife. Someone in the audience drew a sharp breath. Her husband told her that women who are too flashy attract trouble. Her husband told her that as long as her clothes were comfortable, she didn't need to dress up. Her husband told her, "You can't even string a coherent sentence together. Don't go out and embarrass me." I paused, my gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd. Over the course of 10 years, she devolved from a woman who stood radiating brilliance on the world stage into a housewife who knew nothing but cooking and cleaning. Her closet contained only baggy clothes in black and white. Her social circle was reduced to the grocery store and neighborhood gossip, and her entire universe shrank to the size of a kitchen and a living room. I took a deep breath. And then one day, her husband's company hosted an annual gala. He told her to sit in a corner, to not speak, to not interact with a single soul. He said, "You can barely hold a conversation. Don't humiliate me." The silence in the room deepened. That night, a massive crisis erupted at the gala. A billion-dollar multinational partnership was on the verge of total collapse due to a catastrophic translation failure. Everyone was in absolute despair. The corners of my mouth curled up slightly. And then, that woman walked up to the negotiation table. Using fluent German, French, and Russian, she dismantled the crisis, secured the contract, and completely commanded the room. Applause began to ripple through the audience. Do you know what expression was on her husband's face when she stood there, flawlessly pivoting between languages? I paused. Terror. There was no pride in his eyes, no joy, only pure terror. Because in that exact moment, he realized that the woman he had spent a decade trying to systematically destroy had never actually died. She had merely been sleeping. I took a deep breath. Many of you have likely heard this story. Because that woman is me. The audience erupted into applause again, vastly louder and more fervent than before. I am not standing here today to tell you a simple underdog comeback story. I am here to share a far more vital truth. My voice hardened into steel. Never, ever abandon your talents or your pursuit of knowledge. And more importantly, never let anyone else define your worth. I looked out at the over 300 faces, enunciating every word slowly and distinctly. I once believed that love meant compromise and sacrifice. I believed a woman's value was quantified by how much she could endure for her family. I believed that dimming my own light to coddle my husband's fragile ego was a virtue. I shook my head. Now I know the truth. Real love is mutual elevation. It is allowing each other to shine. If someone tries to clip your wings, do not ground yourself for them. Give them a magnificent final bow and show them exactly how high you were always meant to fly. The hall exploded in deafening applause. Over 300 people rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted a full 3 minutes. I stood on the stage, facing the wall of sound, the edges of my eyes growing slightly hot. The spotlight beat down on me, warm and radiant. My silhouette was projected onto the massive LED screen behind me, towering and unshakable. That was 35-year-old Peyton Hayes, a woman who had reclaimed her name, her career, and the brilliance that had been buried in the dust for a decade. The applause gradually subsided. I stepped back to the center of the podium and leaned into the microphone for my final words. My address concludes here. Thank you all. And then I said thank you in 8 different languages, ensuring every single word landed. Danke. Merci. Gracias. Grazie. Arigatou gozaimasu. Spasibo. Sia. Thank you. The applause thundered once more. I walked away from the podium and descended the stairs, step by step. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a crisp, rhythmic cadence. With every step I took, my spine felt a fraction straighter. With every step I took, the crushing weight I had carried on my shoulders for 10 years evaporated a little more. With every step I took, I moved one step closer to that 25-year-old Peyton Hayes who had once stood fearless in the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations. As I walked out of the conference center, sunlight cascaded down through the hotel's massive glass dome, washing over my face. I tilted my head up, faced the light, and closed my eyes. The warmth spread from my cheeks through my entire body. My new life was only just beginning.